Cybercriminals are working overtime. Last year in the fourth quarter alone, phishing attacks disguised as COVID testing information increased by 521%. Barracuda has identified 13 types of email threats and how cybercriminals use them to steal money from your company or personal information from your employees and customers. Find out about the 13 email threat types and how Barracuda can provide complete email protection for your teams, your customers, and your reputation. Get your free ebook at securityweekly.com/Barracuda. That's securityweekly.com/Barracuda.
The shift to remote and hybrid work over the past 2 years has accelerated application development on cloud infrastructure. However, securing these new assets has lagged behind. Qualys CloudView, the next generation cloud security posture management, delivers an end-to-end multi-cloud security and compliance solution encompassing the entire application lifecycle from build to runtime. CloudView enables enterprises to assess their cloud security and compliance posture, identify risks and gaps, auto-remediate issues, proactively enforce best practices, improve compliance and audits rapidly and efficiently. Identify your most vulnerable cloud assets by visiting securityweekly.com/Qualys.
It's time to rethink how we approach cybersecurity because the reality is modern cyber attackers are already past your initial defenses. ExtraHop helps your security team find and eradicate advanced threats before real damage is done. Protect your enterprise and customers with better defense. Learn more about how ExtraHop stops advanced threats at securityweekly.com/ExtraHop. That's extra HOP.
Welcome back to Business Security Weekly. I am your host, Matt Alderman, joined by Jason Albuquerque and Tyler Robinson. Do you have a specific guest or topic that you want us to cover on one of the shows? Submit your suggestions for guests by visiting securityweekly.com/guests and completing the form. We review suggestions often and will reach out to you once reviewed. All right, gentlemen, time for articles this week. I started with an article from CyberSaint, a sponsor on the show. The integration of the FAIR model into their GRC product to create kind of this risk framework or this dashboard, the kind of roll-up report to the board. Interesting concept, right? Because I think this has been one of the holy grails. Like, how can we translate security risk to a financial impact? Now, we could talk about all the challenges with getting the numbers right in the FAIR model and all the other things, but I'm curious, Jason, like, how close is this to what you're being asked for or others are being asked for? Like, does this get us closer to that? This is the financial impact?
I mean, at the end of the day, it brings influence to the table because that's what's going to drive decisions, right? It's the health of the business. It's the expenditure risk that's out there. It's the financial risk. It's the regulatory risk. All of that costs money, right? All of that should have a financial number associated to it. It's what's going to move the needle because when you're sitting in board meetings, it's all about how do we maximize revenue? It's about how do we get more margin? It's about how do we reduce risk? So being able to speak to the board and speak to the executive team in a monetary value is extremely important. It's going to gain influence.
I think it's never going to be perfect, right? Because you are going to end up with numbers that don't match. You're not looking at brand reputation. You're not looking at cost lost opportunity. You're not looking at that return on security investment pieces. So all those pieces, like as long as you're getting numbers there and you're getting the conversation going, I think that falls to that good communication where you're working your relationships, you're having that trust level at the board, as well as all of your other executives bringing that same vocalization where you have visibility, now you have support, now you have some numbers, whether they're right or not, is probably less of the concern because of the dialogue that is now going to happen.
Right. At the end of the day, I think we've been stepping on our own feet because we expect perfection. Well, guess what? If you've ever been in a board meeting, perfection doesn't exist, right? It does not exist. There are no perfect numbers. It's us talking about levels of risk. There's no perfect there. You know, a long time ago, it was in a book even. You know, don't let perfect be the enemy of good. We need to be doing good things.
Yeah.
Right. We need to be able to keep moving forward. And moving forward now is having a model where we can actually speak to monetary risk, right? As it equates to cybersecurity risk. So it's a necessity. We have to be doing it. We have to get better at it, but don't sit there and think you're going to be perfect. Perfect isn't attainable.
Yeah. And I think that's the challenge we've been facing is, as soon as you publish a set of numbers, people are going to say, well, I don't believe those numbers. And then we let perfect become the enemy of good. We need to frame things in a way that we start to understand, maybe dollar impacts on a scale, right? Because it's hard to make some of the justifications for strategies and budgets and other spends without putting some sort of number to it. And so, I like what they're doing. I know the challenges organizations will face when they present them, but if it's starting the dialogue, then that has to be a positive thing for the industry. Because that leads me into article number 2, right? The board doesn't care about buzzwords, right? Because we can't go to the board and be like, oh, we got to go take care of our zero trust strategy or our XDR, this, that, or the other thing. That's not what's going to move the needle at the board. And so I pulled the second article in because I want people to start thinking about security is the same as any other business unit. We have a business to run as security professionals, right? And we need to go into the board meetings with that kind of business structure in place, which kind of ties to the first article here, but it also puts us in a better position to talk about risk to the business, which is what everybody else is talking about. All the finance people are talking that language.
Just to tie that first article back into this one, we talk about budgetary numbers all the time in executive meetings. What do you think forecasting is? It's not exact, right? Mm-hmm. But we're doing forecasting and planning. We're building budgets. We're making decisions on what revenue expectations are. None of that is exact. We're making budgetary decisions all the time as a business. So don't be afraid to be doing that. We have to be doing that. That's what sets us apart, and that's what moves us forward. But also, I literally just had this conversation to article number 2. I had this conversation last week. And for me, it's please stop talking in the terms of tools, right? So for example, I built my house 5 years ago. Matt, you're building a house right now. If you went to your architect and said, I need a plan for a new home, and they walked in the door and they said, hammer, drill, screwdriver, saw, there's your new house, there's your outcome. What would you say?
I have each. Stop talking. I have all those. I mean, I have each of those. That means I can build my own house.
Right. That's it. We need to stop talking in terms of tools. We have to. We need to speak to the outcomes of the business, right? This is where we need to make different choices in how we present things.
That's where a lot of the leadership, you can start to separate good leadership by whether or not they're actually looking at that total cost ownership. They talk about that total cost ownership. What does it take to get that tool spun up? Do we have the resources? Do we have the skills? Are we able to make that tool have the outcome in which we're actually seeking? Or is that a buzzword blinky box that, we're not going to get fired from because it is, whatever the zero initiative is that your CTO is looking for. So we really do have to get to that understanding of knowing good recommendations to get to that outcome and have that strategy figured out. That's your job as a leader, is to figure out the strategy side and what it takes to get to that. The outcome is what your board actually cares about. So make sure you're conveying that with the right tools and educating yourself on how to not get taken as well. Because there's a lot of CISOs that see vendors, and the vendors pitch them all the blinky boxes and tools in the world, and that still does not get to the outcome in which they're trying to be ready for.
And they'll never get the influence at the board level or the executive level to get investment. Yeah. If they have conversations around how are we retaining customers? How are we helping drive new revenue? Right? How are we making us a differentiator out there in the market? Like, those are the things that we need to be talking
XDR,
about.
Jason, XDR.
Yeah, totally.
XDR and zero trust, right? I thought it was interesting when he...
My Sawzall. That's my Sawzall.
Yeah. Well, I thought it was interesting. He started the article by saying the only time he ever heard a buzzword from the board was Y2K. Why? Because it had business impact.
Because it was going to cripple the business.
Because it was business impact, right? Y2K had the potential to bring systems down and stop business. That's the reason that buzzword was the only one, because people understood the potential business impact. The board doesn't understand what an XDR or zero trust is going to do for the business. Like, they just don't
care, or should they care? Nor do they care.
They know ransomware because it has money, right? Money associated. They know that the ransomware is a risk. What are you doing to make sure we're secure and we don't get ransomed? They don't care about the tool you're using.
Right. Yep. Exactly right. This next article, we've covered the SEC proposed rule changes, right? This article gets a little interesting because, so here's what happens, right? And he uses Sarbanes-Oxley, which I think is a perfect example. We've used this example for this exact rulemaking component. In the early days of Sarbanes-Oxley, only applied to public companies, right? If you were publicly traded, the SEC had the requirements to put down, the SOX 302 and 404 requirements, right? But the trickle effect was down to private businesses, because now what you had is you had third-party relationships. And so the public companies went to their suppliers and said, well, you have to be SOX compliant as well if you want to do business with me, because I'm now responsible to the SEC. This article goes down a very similar path with if the SEC were to put these rules in place for cybersecurity, this potentially has the same trickle effect as Sarbanes-Oxley on the financial side now to the security side, which is public companies will now take these requirements and roll them down to private companies, making private companies now needing to take have more expertise around cybersecurity. Thoughts?
Yep. Please, I hope this happens. I hope it trickles down. I hope they start looking at it from a third-party, fourth-party vendor risk assessment perspective. Please, please, please. 100%. I mean, there needs to be some level of motivation and pressure to get private organizations that aren't publicly traded to make some headway here and invest intelligently.
I was going to say, making sure this is
point, not in blinky lights, in strategy.
No.
Right. All right.
Making sure this is done right, though, is important, right? Like we see a lot of the cyber insurances now, they've always had really good policies around security. They've had questionnaires, you've had all these forms to fill out, verifications. That did not get them to a place of security. Now they've gotten to the place where you're having to validate and verify and meet a minimum level, not just in a questionnaire, but validated by a third party. This is where we really start to see some effective change. If you have good strategy and you're pushing good security as part of whatever they're going to force down, that makes sense. But that really has to have the input from people in our industry in order to do that well. The reason cybersecurity insurance is now doing better is because they've reached out to the experts. They've asked them, what are attackers doing? What pieces and mitigations would have stopped these attacks? What would move the bar without a tool? What policies can we implement and enforce and validate? We can quantify this. This is not a qualification. This is a quantification. How do we do that and look at it so that we have numbers to match it? That's going to be when it makes a difference.
Well,
and my hope is that because they're putting out there that they want cybersecurity expertise on the board, that having a good cybersecurity leader to dictate how they're assessing their third-party, fourth-party vendors, hopefully it will be validation versus checking the box. Right. So that's where I hope we're going with this.
Let's hope so. Now, so this does get into some recommendations down at the bottom of this article. And I think this goes back to everything we talk about. Starts with risk, right? Identify specific risks, likelihood of risks, and how do you want to put controls in place to address those, right? I mean, it's a risk discussion at the end of the day. It talks about the right policies that you need to make sure you're going to have in place because you're going to get asked for some of these policies. And then obviously it's ultimately implementing the control frameworks to support these policies and to mitigate those risks. Easier said than done, Jason, as we know, right? Because it's taken us how long to get large organizations to get their arms around risk, policies, and controls, let alone smaller, privately held companies. It's a good starting point, but there's a lot of help needed here, I think, to get some of this done. But companies are going to have to start looking at this because I think all this stuff is going to come into purview as part of third-party risk management from the public companies and trickle down to all these private companies.
Yeah, no, 100% agreed. And the piece that I loved about the the alignment with the SEC side of the island in Sarbanes-Oxley is the board oversight, right? That was pulled out right there in this article.
Yep.
That board oversight is key. So that means board liability. So guess what? That's another trickle down, right? Now, if you're on a board of directors, even of a privately held company, you could still be liable if these type of scenarios trickle down.
It's still always a hard jump, though, that policy to implementation. That is the biggest leap for especially small to medium business. Like, how do you actually
say easy,
go
do
about
hard, right? It's say easy, do hard. But here's the thing. There's a lot of talented folks out there. There's a lot of talented organizations who can help. There's a lot. You don't have to do it yourself, right? Go out there and find the expertise. Find a good partner. Find a good organization that you can work with to help you through the journey. And know that it's not something that you have to go pull the trigger and go spend millions of dollars out the gate. Q4, you're going to go spend $3 million to get this done. No, it's a journey.
Yeah.
Right. Your partner will look at it. They'll help you identify risk. They'll help you classify the risk based on your organization. And then you go through a risk remediation plan. Right. You plan it out. It's a roadmap.
Yeah.
It's a journey.
And I highly recommend keep it simple, stupid. Like policies cannot be over exhaustive. I remember in my early days of consulting, walking into an organization that had these huge policies. I'm like, as soon as you put this in paper, you now need to audit against this. Like, why is half of this language in here? You can't do it, right? Keep them straightforward. Keep them simple. Keep them very aligned to your risks. Make sure you have the right policies in place so you can implement a set of controls that you can actually measure against, so that when the auditors come in or when you go through your third-party risk assessment, everything's aligned. Like, you're not saying things that you have no ability to even do. So I caution people not to go with these huge, big policy structures. Kind of keep it a little more simplified, keep it very focused, and then build your program around those. That keeps it nice and tight. Now, you may get a requirement to expand a requirement. Fine, then you look at that as a one-off to expand the policy and the control framework. But the bigger you go, the harder it's going to be for you to implement and manage all those controls that you put in your policies.
Do you know where we make the mistake, Matt? And I've said this to many folks building out policy. Don't treat it like a legal contract. We look at it almost from a legal lens. And what we do is we complicate it, right? It's not a legal contract. It's a policy, right? So number one, maybe not the best place to have your legal counsel putting input on it, because they'll turn it into a legal document, right? But don't treat it like a legal contract. You can't. Nobody will read it. Nobody will abide by it. And it's might as well just be shelfware.
And if you do, you'll never pass an audit against it. You just won't. You won't. Okay, next. The best managers are leaders and vice versa. I thought this article was interesting. Harvard Business Review does great articles. And we talk about, managers and leaders. And this article is like, yeah, they're two sides of the same coin. Sometimes you manage, sometimes you lead. And it depends on the situation. But all great leaders are great managers too, and vice versa. It's just a really interesting way to think about this.
Yeah. No, I mean, from my side of the aisle, you have to have both talents, right? When you're in a leadership role, you have to be able to lead folks, but also manage when you need to. But for me, it's all about the percent on what side of the coin you're spending on, right? If you're in a leadership role, the majority of your time should be spent leading the organization. And then, having folks in management roles, the majority of their time doing that. I mean, but it should be able to flip back and forth. The one place that I didn't like the comment, and I don't know if maybe it was by mistake within the article. There was a statement in there that said the need to understand that managing a process may require surrendering leadership, allowing reports to take the reins. I almost think maybe they meant control versus leadership, because by doing that, you're a true leader, right? Mm-hmm. By actioning that. So I'm wondering if they meant surrendering control versus surrendering leadership, because a great leader will surrender control and allow their staff to take the reins and do what needs to be done. So,
yeah.
And then a sentence or two later, it says it's not a sign of weakness to hand over control. It's an act of leading by trusting. So, the article may need an edit, or
I would use a different verb.
Yeah. Because I just don't want folks to misconstrue that you're surrendering leadership by doing that. You're not.
You're not.
Right? You're showing leadership by doing that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think those are one and the same, that dichotomy. It is interesting. It's kind of like that book, Think Fast and Slow, right? Like you're having to think about the horizon, you're having to think about your people, you're having to think about leading and managing, which are in essence two different skill sets, but they have to be aligned. And if you align them inside of yourself, that actually makes you better at both sides of that, which typically is where you end up.
Yeah, because good leaders will give up control at the right times to allow their team to continue to grow and execute. Right? I mean, you have to.
And again, it's about the use of the time. You know, when I'm hiring leaders into the organization, I want them to be strategically leading teams. If they're spending an inordinate amount of time managing, that means we don't have the right managers in play, and they're doing, they're not doing the role they were brought in for. So that's what I mean by the balance. There needs to be balance, right, between what side of the coin you're focusing on, depending on what position you're in within the organization.
Yeah. You don't want to kill a leader and the visionary qualities that that's what you're paying the high dollar for, is that
That's it. 100%.
strategy and visionary. And if I'm managing, like 100% tell you I am managing and I'm not liking it, and it's probably you're good at it because you have to lead, but that's not where you should be spending your time.
And to be honest with you, it's a good way to lose a good leader, right?
Yes.
If they're stuck in the weeds managing on the day-to-day, they're not going to last long. So we all know what it's like trying to hire these days. Don't lose a good leader. If they're managing on the day-to-day, that just means that they don't have the right management team working for them.
Yep. And on the topic of hiring, these are the 5 important ways experts say organizations can take action to grow their cybersecurity workforce today. So you tied it right in there, Jason. Some recommendations for hiring. We know this is still very difficult. I mean, we're hiring. It's always challenging finding good resources. We've covered a lot of this list before, right? Make job postings more attractive to diverse candidates. I really like number 2, which is attract security-minded software engineers looking for opportunities, because I think that's a great opportunity to bring folks into the organization with a unique skill set that's needed in most businesses, but they're not necessarily coming directly from the security team, but they have a kind of a security mindset already embedded in them. I think is a really interesting one here.
I would also caution on that one. I think that is a great way, and you should be doing that 100%. You're going to get even system admins, network admins. Those are great places. Make sure you have a mentoring program in place, or that you have the scalability to mentor the right people there to do the mentoring, because you will burn out and or collapse both sides of that if you do not have that structure set up in place prior to bringing them over.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So as I do often, I point out some of the places that are missing in some of these articles, right? Some of the pieces that are missing. The 3 that I had just aligned completely with what Tyler said. Have a strong professional/career development program, right? Build a bench internally, shift left, hire at the entry level, hire on attitude and aptitude, and then train the rest. Those are the 3 that I put in there, because that's how we're going to beat this talent gap.
Yeah.
Honestly, we really, really are. So you have to have those strong programs in play in order for those upper 5 to even be successful.
Yep.
Get creative too. I would also say there is there's a lot of attractiveness for the higher performers that have some autonomy with a very creative and open role that you help have them define. If you're looking for that very, very strategic person, someone that doesn't fit in that box, and then offer away some of the things that maybe if you're a larger corporation, have ways for those high performers and very creative people to not have to fall into very specific boxes that suck time away from what they do the best.
Yep. And if all else fails, just call up Patreon's former security team and you can have one instantly.
And just fire your whole team.
Wow.
When I saw this article, when I saw the headline come across, I'm like, this is a joke, right? And I pull up the article, I start reading, I'm like, no, they fired their entire security team, outsourced the whole thing. Where's all your expertise? Like, you just threw out the baby with the bathwater. Like, dude, how do you do that?
Institutional knowledge, insider risk. You've got so many things you're combating during and after a breach that this is like the worst case scenario.
Yeah, I mean, I think we covered this on one of our last ones, right? And we were waiting to see exactly what happened. We knew they got fired, but we didn't know much of the detail around what happened. So that's the final product. See you later. Goodbye. we're bringing in an entire outsourced team.
Yeah.
I mean, you know what? This gig isn't getting any easier, right? Securing our organizations is not getting any easier. And to just eliminate any of the institutional knowledge that you may have had.
Unless there's like criminal or gross negligence, like up and down all levels of that entire department. Like this is like a horrible divorce. You have all the same problems you had internally. You have all the same problems to deal with now during a breach, and now you've added an entirely new team and the time to spin up that team, and you've lost institutional knowledge. So there is in no case any better situation. You've not put yourself in any better situation in all of those.
Right. And I always want to give organizations the benefit of the doubt, but I mean, the benefit of the doubt is very, very slim at this point. Yeah. You know what I mean? It's like you said, unless they were all committing illegal activities on the daily, on corporate assets, I don't know why else you would can every single person on the.
They just had a movie theater in there. They all watched the movies together as a team the whole day. Didn't do anything else. That's it.
If at the end of the day they were looking at operational efficiencies and saving some money, there's a balance you can have there. Do you know what I mean? Like you strike the balance and keep the good folks, get rid of the folks that aren't performing, bring in a third party to help augment. There's other avenues.
There's that career and development path right there. Guess what? You're in charge now.
Right. But I agree with you, Jason. Like, there's a balance here. If you're going to go outsource a bunch of these functions, I fully get it, right? Because let somebody else deal with some of the headaches. But you still need that bridge internally to know where the bodies are buried, who the right people are to communicate to, so that you're effective in the relationship to get rid of the entire team.
Who's going to advocate for the business?
Right.
Who's going to advocate for the business? Who's going to be the stakeholder with skin in the game that's an FTE inside of those four walls of that business? Who's going to be the advocate?
Yeah.
Who can actually challenge the process if they need to with the third-party vendor?
No one. This is great for the vendor. The vendor can come in and say whatever they want as much as they want to spend.
That's exactly what I'm getting at. Right. I mean, there's no advocate on the inside.
Yeah.
They probably aren't going to get that now that they fired a whole team either. Like long-standing brand reputation, like these things live on for a little while. So your ability to rebuild a new team later on and have someone come in and take over ownership of something after they've seen this happen, you've pretty well limited your options.
Yeah. Yeah. I would not advise this to anyone. Now, if you wanted to augment, you wanted to make a major investment there, okay, but let make sure you got some balance here, because I'm not sure this is going to be super successful.
You know what, Matt? Here's what an interesting exercise could be. Over the course of the next 2 or 3 quarters, can we look at the financial health of Patreon and see what happens?
Maybe.
Like, I'd love to just monitor their financial health over time and see if this had any effect whatsoever, or if the sheeples are just continuing on.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. I'll see what I can find. How's that? We can report back on it later. I think we're doing a security money segment coming up in October. Maybe we'll have to put a little tracker in place for them or something.
There you go.
What happens when they go and the outsourcing doesn't work? That's the real kicker. Like, what happens when you've jumped enough vendors or you don't get a vendor that will fit the budget? You have to rebuild internally. How do you actually go about rebuilding something like that internally? You can't go find and hire a whole team, especially with a reputation like that. Like,
hey, come work for the organization that canned its whole security team. I'm a brand new security team.
Oops. Yeah, oops. Gentlemen, always a pleasure. Thank you for joining me today. Thank you, everyone, for watching and listening. We'll see you next week on Business Security Weekly.